call it uncommon dream, uncommon tragedy, and that will explain itself as we go along. February the 17th, 1927, Mary Smouse returned to her home at 626 West Broadway in Alexandria around 11 in the evening of Thursday, February 17th, 1927, to a scene that must have been devastating. An eyewitness recalled a crowd estimated at one-half of the city's population stood in the streets and yards near her home in the peaceful West Side neighborhood. They were curiosity seekers awaiting the final outcome of the third tragedy to occur in her family. Whether or not she had previous knowledge of what awaited her upon her return from Indianapolis was not recorded. Mary spent that night at the home of a neighbor. She was attending a meeting in Indianapolis, dinner meeting, I think Claypool Hotel. And somebody came up and whispered in her ear she needed to get home. And she left immediately. July the 8th, 1907. Undoubtedly, she was unable to sleep, and perhaps her thoughts drifted back to a far more pleasant evening 20 years earlier in Mankato, Minnesota. It was on that July 8, 1907 evening, Mary and her husband, Dr. Leonard F. Smouse, were guests of honor at a banquet given them by members of the local medical profession. They were saying goodbye to Dr. Smouse, who was leaving his highly respected practice in Mankato for a new challenge. That is his business card. Everything you see here I have been able to uncover at the wonderful Alexandria Monroe Township Historical Museum. If you haven't been there, put that on your bucket list. This is his business card, and I'll ask, are there any people that speak German in the audience today that can interpret that? No. What it says is, speaks German. The doctor was letting people know that he did speak German because in Minnesota there were a lot of German-speaking people. The couple would leave the following day for Alexandria, Indiana, where he had purchased a hospital, which he planned to reopen and operate. It had been his wish for a number of years to have his own hospital to which he could devote his life's work. Dr. Smouse was considered a surgeon of exceptional ability. He graduated from the Rush Medical School in Chicago. His internship was on the staff of the Cook County Hospital in Chicago. You see a picture of Leonard and Mary Smouse. His business card in Alexandria. Her business card. Charles Mayo. So impressive were his skills that Charles Mayo, famous the world over, and along with his brother William, were founders of the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, once told him that if he, Mr. Mayo, ever required surgery, he wanted Dr. Smouse to do the work. Dr. Smouse rejected offers to join the permanent staff because of his desire to operate his own hospital. March 1907. The hospital he purchased was originally opened in 1894 by Dr. Frank P. Norse, who operated until 1905 when he sold it to Dr. Esther A. Ryerson. Unable to keep it open, Dr. Ryerson was forced to close the hospital after only a few months' trial, and it remained closed until after Dr. Smouse purchased it in March 1907. July. After arriving with their two children, George and Marie, in July 1907, the family soon left on a trip to Vienna, Austria, where both the doctor and Mary attended clinics for the training of the newest procedures. Mrs. Smouse, a registered nurse before she met and married the doctor, was matron and would be in charge of the nurses' training school at the hospital once they returned to Alexandria. January 1908. The family returned in January 1908, but did not open the hospital until March due to the extensive changes and improvements that were not yet completed. To remain close to their work, the family made the hospital their home. Several hundred persons attended the formal opening of the hospital on Tuesday, March 24, 1908. Before the opening, the hospital was formally dedicated by the Reverend Father J. Baker of St. Mary's Church. Because many business and professional people could not attend, a second opening was held on Sunday, March the 29th. This is the first advertisement announcing the practice that I could find in the Alexandria Times-Tribune newspaper. From April 1, this is from the April 1st, 1908 issue of that newspaper. I thought it was interesting that in his placement he said ambulance service provided. We're talking 1908. A photograph dated 1908 shows what is probably a very proud Dr. Smouse and his family with the staff in the yard of the hospital. He was nationally known as a surgeon and a diagnostician, and patients came to the hospital from all parts of the country. The Alexandria Hospital had a reputation and a distinction that put it above any other hospital anywhere in Indiana. At state and national medical association meetings, the doctor often presented papers on his theories and surgical successes in unique cases. A full picture showing the Alexandria Hospital, the doctor, and his family. The hospital. He had good reason to be proud. The Alexandria Hospital was the first in the area to install X-ray equipment and modern diagnostic tools. Think of that. X-ray equipment that early. He'd purchased all the real estate within a half a block to provide a quiet zone as well as a garden and recreation area. In addition, hammocks were stretched between the many poplar shade trees surrounding the hospital for the patients to enjoy in warm and fair weather. Each room was heated by a small gas stove or fireplace, and the main floors and the halls by large coal-burning stoves. Although electricity was used and available throughout the hospital, gas fixtures were kept in case of emergency, particularly in the operating room. No elevators, just wide stairways. At holiday time, all the patients who could be moved were carried down to a large parlor for a celebration and song fest around the piano and organ. The ground floor. On the ground floor of the hospital was his office, examining rooms, a waiting room, a parlor, laboratory, emergency and X-ray, kitchen and a dining room. The second floor, 8 patient rooms which could be expanded to 12 or 15 capacity when required. Surgery was performed on the second floor. The third floor was private living quarters for the family. There was an annex. A 2-story annex building facing Sheridan Street was erected in 1912. It provided complete care and isolation for patients with contagious diseases. And here is a postcard image of the hospital and the annex behind it. An actual photograph of Sheridan Street. Early on, you see the hospital here to the left, and I draw your attention to this building. This is a home. This will later figure in the story. Today, that same view looks like that. I'll put them side by side, and you can see how things have changed over the years, looking south on Sheridan Street. This is Broadway, which runs in front of it. I'm always amused by the single light bulb. I don't know who changed that bulb when it burned out. But beyond that, we see the Pan American Plate Glass Company over here. That same view today, put them side by side, and you can see the changes over the years. Notice the hitching rail, and you see just the back end of a horse. This would be the staff, family and staff of the hospital. Speaking of the staff, in 1910, I looked it up, Janet Reed, she was 24 years old. She was born in Michigan. Minnie Floretti was 20, from Germany. Barbara Sears, 21, from Minnesota. Barbara Hoffman, 63, from Germany. Other hospital staff, Elsie, the German girl who cooked and cleaned. Mr. Schaum, they helped with the gardening. Mrs. Ward did laundry for a number of years. Mrs. Finch sewed for the hospital and family. And Miss Reed was a head nurse. As you can see, it took quite a number of people to operate that hospital. 625 Monroe Street, here is the hospital. My arrow points to that 625 Monroe Street, he built a waiting station 2 blocks north at 625 West Monroe Street so that patients who traveled to the city by interurban cars could be taken to the hospital after exiting the cars at the waiting station. And there is a picture of that waiting station. Here is his hospital. But he built that for the patients so that they would not have to wait. If the weather was inclement, they could stay there till somebody could come down from the hospital to bring them to the hospital. That's the scene today. I'll put them side by side. Underground passageways. Another unique hospital feature was the presence of underground passageways that traversed beneath the hospital grounds and connected to the basement. These probably served 2 purposes. One, they were a cool place to store medicines and other perishable medical items to protect them from the summer's heat. They also then, I said, connected the hospital to the annex, but there was another purpose. They were 4 to 5 feet wide and 6 feet high. How did I know that? How many of you worked at Guide Lamp? Do you remember a secretary there by the name of Betty Mailing? Betty Mailing was married to George Mailing. George Mailing lived about a block from the hospital as a little boy and played in the passageways. Before he passed, I called him and interviewed him, and I said, "Tell me what you remember about the hospital, the passageways." And this is what he told me. They were brick-lined, they were 4 to 5 feet wide and 6 feet high. He says it was an excellent place for a little boy to play. Brick-lined with dirt floors. They connected the hospital with the annex, the greenhouse, and other outbuildings. Secondly, utilizing a concept implemented by President Thomas Jefferson at his Monticello home in Virginia, the passageways would provide a constant supply of cooled air during the hot summer months. Air would be drawn through the passageways into the hospital and exit through an open skylight roof. Back that up. How many of you have been to Jefferson's home, Monticello? Do you remember how it sits on a knoll, and out at the 4 corners of the yard are tunnels, are openings in the ground, and those are all 4 tunnels that run back to the center of the house. They come in at the basement level of Jefferson's home. Air is drawn through those tunnels. There are grates that cover them to keep animals out today, but their air is drawn through there, and as it passes through the ground temperature of 55 degrees, it's cooled. When it enters the house in the basement, it's 55 degrees. Then convection allows it to rise through the house, and that's how Jefferson air conditioned his house. Same concept here. The passageways drew cool air in, rose through the house, and there was a skylight at the top and the roof of the building that allowed the air to escape when it was open, thus cooling the house, the hospital. 1920. By 1920, the family had grown to 4 children with the birth of John and Anna. George was born in 1903, Marie in 1904, John in 1910, and Anna in 1912. The hospital was doing well, and the Smouses were enjoying the fulfillment of their dream. But that was about to be forever changed. February 27th, 1920. On Friday morning, February 27th, 1920, Dr. Smouse was killed instantly on his way to make an emergency call when his automobile was struck by a southbound Big 4 passenger train at what was known as the Fraser Crossing, which in Madison County is 1300 north. The view at the crossing was obstructed by an orchard on the north and woodland on the south and was thought to be the cause. The time on his watch was stopped at 10:26, indicating the time of the accident. This is that intersection today. This is 1300 north looking east, and here you see the railroad track. They would not have been signaled then, not at that time, but you can see the heavily wooded area. I'm sure his mind was on the emergency that he was going to, and he drove right across and was hit by the train. We see it from the other direction here. July 12th, 1922. Mary kept the hospital open with the assistance of surgeons from Muncie, Doctors Moore and Mix, and Anderson, Dr. Thomas Jones, and Alexandria, Dr. A.E. Otto. This arrangement did not prove to be financially profitable, and early in 1924, the hospital was closed, and Mrs. Smouse took up private duty nursing in Alexandria and the surrounding community. July 12, 1922. However, before that, tragedy struck a second time during the summer of 1922. Mary was in the hospital the morning of July 12, 1922, when she received word of an incoming emergency. Little did she know that emergency was her youngest son, John. The 12-year-old was riding his bike when it struck the side of a truck, throwing the boy to the pavement, killing him instantly. The accident occurred less than a block east of where the Big Four railroad tracks cross Washington Street on the city's near west side. I returned to that scene of the accident to see if I could understand it and reconstruct it. This is the alley that runs down to Washington Street that young John was riding his bicycle on. As you can see, it was now and was then. This was a lumber company at that time. His view of the railroad tracks, which are over here, was blocked. The alley on the south side of Washington Street descended to the junction with the street, just as it does today. It was in this alley that John Smouse was riding his bicycle northward, approaching Washington. Witnesses said he was not holding the handlebars and was traveling fast. He would have been coming down this alleyway to Washington Street. At the same time, a southbound train was crossing Washington. You can see the tracks here. Waiting for the train to clear the crossing was a truck headed east. In other words, on the other side of the tracks. When the train cleared, it would head east. At a midpoint in the alley, John could have easily observed the passing train to his left because this opening was there then as it is today. However, as he neared Washington, John's view of the crossing would have been obstructed by the presence of a long building occupied by the T.W. Mullen Coal Company that ran parallel to the alley and stood between the alley and the railroad tracks. That's that building today. It was then later became a lumber company. He probably assumed that when he reached Washington, the coast would be clear to enter the street without stopping, since there would be no oncoming traffic due to the train. Little did he know that the train had cleared the crossing and the truck was now making its way east on Washington, coming this way. Here's the alley. Witnesses said both John and the driver swerved to avoid each other, but it was too late. That's John. February 17th, 1927. Less than 5 years later, and shortly before midnight, February 17th, 1927, Mary Smouse anxiously watched from a neighbor's house the drama that was unfolding in and around her home. It would be the worst tragedy of her life, and one that would be etched into the memories of Alexandria's citizens for years to come. Mary's anguish over her eldest son George's despicable act had to be heart-wrenching. He'd been a promising medical student with a new wife, and now he was a hunted murderer. That's George. George graduated from Alexandria High School in 1920, only a few months after his father's accidental death at the railroad crossing north of the city. He entered Notre Dame University, where he spent 3 years, and then transferred to Loyola University of Chicago, where he attained his Bachelor of Science degree in June of 1924. From an early age, he showed signs of reaching a high place in the medical field. Also learned that he was quite accomplished with the violin. It was while he was a student at Notre Dame that his younger brother John was killed by accident in Alexandria. This is the commencement exercises for Alexandria High School, and in there you will find George Smouse's name, George Smouse's name here. I call your attention to Russell Dunn. Russell Dunn was my father's best friend. Marie Underwood. While a pre-med student at Loyola Medical School in Chicago, he met Marie Underwood from Muncie, Indiana, who was studying music at the Lyceum Arts College. This is the 1920 Muncie Central yearbook. That's Marie. My dad is in that same yearbook. So my dad knew Marie, and my dad's best friend knew George Smouse. Both were considered accomplished musicians. I'm talking about Marie and George. There they are. They married July 24th, 1925 at the Holy Name Cathedral in Chicago. From early on, there must have been problems in the marriage. This is a copy of the marriage certificate, again housed at the wonderful Alexandria Monroe Township Historical Society. Divorce. In June of 1926, and for reasons unknown, Marie obtained a divorce in Muncie. Friends later stated George lived with Marie in Muncie, but for a few weeks only. At some point in time, he had dropped out of medical school. Speculation was that he'd become involved in making bootleg alcohol, which he was selling in Prohibition-era Chicago. Marie had written him numerous letters professing her love and pleading with him to join her upon his graduation. The letters were found by Chicago police when they searched his room at 2902 Prairie Avenue. In February 1927, a warrant was issued in Delaware County Circuit Court for his failure to pay a $50 attorney fee in connection with the divorce. Everything that now happens was because he didn't pay a $50 fee. George failed to make an appearance, and a citation was issued for him. Ignoring the citation, a bench warrant was issued. The warrant was sent to the sheriff in Madison County, who sent it on to the Alexandria Police Department to be served. George Smouse had been notified of the warrant and had promised to appear and go with the officials to Muncie, but had neglected to do so. According to Alexandria Police, Smouse threatened Hughes over the phone. Opal Hughes, Chief of Police, Alexandria, Indiana. During World War I, he'd served in the United States Navy. He was a Mason and a member of the Odd Fellows and the American Legion. From 1921 to 25, Hughes served as the Madison County Deputy Sheriff. Alexandria Mayor J.C. Bratton appointed Hughes Chief of Police in January of 1926. Just before taking office, he married Barbara Koeniger of Huntsville. Opal is coming to see me. Just watch what happens to him. George Smouse. Opal Hughes. At 5 o'clock Thursday afternoon, February 17, 1927, 32-year-old Alexandria Chief of Police Opal J. Hughes drove to the Smouse home on West Broadway, the former Alexandria Hospital, and by now a sanitarium, to serve the warrant. Anticipating a visit as a result of his failure to comply with the orders of the Delaware Circuit Court, Smouse was known to have shown a pistol to an acquaintance 2 days previously with the threat, "Opal is coming to see me. Just watch what happens to him." Remember, this is over a $50 attorney fee. 5 p.m., February 17, 1927, Hughes parked his car beside the steps leading to the side entrance of the hospital located on the west side of the property on Sheridan Street. He parked his car right here. He apparently met George in the courtyard, which would have been the yard between the hospital and the annex, which is here, and I'll show you that in a minute, and a short distance to the north. Again, it would have been in this courtyard area where the two met. The chief of police would have climbed these steps and saw George and walked back there. This is what it looks like today. The hospital is gone, but the annex is still there. The steps are still there. The annex. 5 p.m. The night before, Smouse had returned from Chicago, where he'd been for several days. Police in Alexandria learned of his return, and Chief Hughes went alone to make the arrest. After parking his car, Hughes went to the annex, a two-story house which served as a home for hospital employees and contained a built-in garage. Smouse evidently had witnessed the approach of Hughes and had met him at the door of the garage. Shortly after Hughes' arrival, a shot was heard, followed at an interval by 4 more. 5:05. A half a block north at the corner of Madison and Sheridan, two boys, George Whaley, age 14, and Henry Murray, age 12, were delivering the Times-Tribune. They heard a gunshot. A moment later, 4 more shots rang out, and the two boys ran toward the hospital in time to see Smouse half carrying and half dragging Hughes' body toward the former hospital. Hughes, they said, was still alive and calling for help, and that Hughes was limply grasping a revolver in his right hand. The boys ran to the home of Albert Whaley, George's father, at 604 West Madison Street to report what they had seen. Somewhere along the way, they encountered George Phillips, who was returning home from his work at his barber shop in downtown Alexandria. Phillips proceeded to the police station and reported what the boys told him to Patrolman Fuller and Manring. This would have been the corner where the boys were delivering papers when they heard the shots ring out. They ran down the street here and could look in here and see what scene I just described to you. That's the home of Arthur Whaley, the one boy's father, where they went to report what they had seen. There being no witnesses or survivors of the crime, the following information is a mixture of fact and speculation on my part, but where speculated, it is based upon evidence. I tried to reconstruct for you what I believe happened. Hughes met Smouse in the alley. Investigators found a gallon of distilled alcohol near the garage door. Later, a 100-gallon still with 26 gallons of distilled alcohol was found on the second floor of the annex. He was making bootleg liquor. A struggle ensued with the stronger Smouse overpowering the officer. The boys testified hearing a total of 5 shots fired. It was later learned that one bullet struck Smouse, penetrating his neck crosswise, striking him at the Adam's apple. In other words, right across the Adam's apple. Coroner Earl Sells reported the first bullet fired entered Hughes' left breast, punctured the lung, and emerged under the left shoulder blade. Hughes' left arm was broken between the elbow and the shoulder. That all 5, and I have a question mark there because that's still a question in my mind as to how many bullets were fired. That all 5 bullets were effective was evidenced by 3 more wounds about the chest. Another bullet had penetrated the chief's coat but had not touched the body. A badly bruised left eye indicated that a scuffle preceded the shooting. The chief's handcuffs were never found, but the keys were found in George's pocket. The discovery led to the belief that Hughes may have attempted to handcuff Smouse and that he might have succeeded in snapping one of the cuffs on George's wrist, only to have the later break away and use the steel bracelet as a weapon in striking the officer down. This might account for the terrible blow which Hughes sustained over his left eye and which could not have been the result of a bare fist blow. However, these handcuffs allegedly belonged to the Chief Hughes. They are now the property of the Alexandria Monroe Township Historical Society. They were donated to them a number of years later with that story with them, so I photographed them. 5:10. Once inside the hospital, Smouse put the body into a clothes box in a corner of a first-floor room. The body was later found jammed down in the box and in a sitting position. Hughes' clothing was disarranged, indicating a bitter struggle. Clothes and rags were placed over the body, and the lid was then tightly fixed over the box. This is from the Alexandria Times-Tribune. This is the box. The X is put on there by the editor of the newspaper to show you that this is the box where Hughes' body was placed by Smouse. A few minutes later, Smouse emerged in a different apparel and with a lawn hose sprayed water on the alley at the place of the shooting. Failing to remove the bloodstains, he shoveled cinders over the spot and rearranged the cinders in the alley where the struggle had occurred. He then drove Hughes's car into the garage and partially covered it with gunny sacks and closed the door. Next, he appeared at 718 West Madison Street, the home of Mrs. Lewis, and her name was either Emma or Edna, I find it both ways, Bender, returning some radio parts he had just borrowed. George was apparently good friends with the Bender son, William, as he was an invited guest to Smouse home upon the announcement of George and Marie's wedding. She later stated that he was carrying 2 guns. I believe he went there seeking William for help, returning the radio parts as an excuse. That is the Bender home at 718 West Madison Avenue. Here is shown the scene of the slaying of Alexandria Chief of Police Hughes by George Smouse at the alley. The lower cross here marks the spot where the officer fell with a bullet in his left breast. Arrow at the right here indicates the direction which Smouse dragged the victims by to hide it in a box in the house. Cross at the left, it calls attention to the hose with which the slayer washed bloodstains from the driveway into the garage in which he stored the officer's car, partially covering it with gunny sacks. I apologize for the quality of the photograph. We're talking about a 1927 newspaper. It doesn't copy all that well. That is that annex today. And this is what was the garage entrance and the entrance ramp to the garage. Still there. Between 5:30 and 6. After leaving the Bender home, Mrs. Patrick Olive Mailing, who lived at 711 West Madison, asked him as to the nature of the trouble. Obviously, she heard some scuffling. Now, Mrs. Mailing, Olive Mailing, would be the mother of George Mailing, who I told you I interviewed to find out about the tunnels. She saw Smouse, and asked him about the nature of the trouble. His reply was, "Oh, he's all right, he's all right." Mrs. Bender stated that she last saw him hurriedly walking west through the alley. Well, that's what the newspaper says, but actually his direction would have been south. Ed Whipple, who lived at 604 West Broadway, was the last person to report seeing George. He stated he last saw him walking west on Broadway and then turned south on Sheridan. This is the Patrick Mailing home where Mrs. Mailing came out. It's right across the street from the Bender home where she was trying to find out what's going on. This is the alley that he would have walked south in to this alley when he would have turned to the left and come down this alley. This alley takes you right by the annex and continues on. This is the Ed Whipple home at 604 Broadway. When the alley got down here, it turned, and then he came out here onto Broadway and would have walked by the Whipple home, looking west on Broadway from the Ed Whipple home down towards the hospital. So what he's done, he's just made a big circle here. And I'll show you here what I'm talking about. Here's the hospital. From the hospital, he went over to the Bender home to return the parts, came back, and as he was going to go down this alley, Mrs. Mailing stepped out, said, "What's going on?" He said, "Oh, he's all right." Came down the alley, and then he walked west, clear down here, and turned, and then came back this way, and then turned, and they lose sight of him here. The arrival of the police and sheriff. Manhunt. Now began a manhunt which had not been equaled in Alexandria since the eventful night of March 4-5, 1911, which gave the city nationwide prominence. Alexandria police officers Dolph Fuller and Manring, along with barber George Phillips and a number of citizens, hastened to the Smouse home. Fuller would later be appointed acting police chief by Mayor Heritage. It's believed that Smouse saw the approaching cars while still on Madison Street, which would have been approximately 20 minutes after the shooting. This may be the reason he used the alleys. No trace of either Smouse or Hughes was found when they arrived at the hospital. As news spread, other citizens joined the searchers. Around 6:20, Anderson police officers arrived. The reason they did that is because the Alexandria Police Department was only 3 people, so they needed more help. At 6:30, the body of Opal Hughes was found and taken to the Heritage and Son mortuary. His gun and handcuffs were missing. The chief's car was found in the garage and his cap nearby. Apparently the gunny sacks thrown over the car didn't hide it very well. By now all the lights in the building were turned on and would remain on throughout the night. Shortly before 7, Sheriff Frank Daniels arrived from Anderson with officers William Irvin and Arthur Daniels. Daniels deputized a dozen Anderson police officers. Members of the local American Legion post, of which Hughes was a member, became the first organized body of searchers after being deputized. They and other citizens patrolled the country roads far and wide. In addition, Anderson Police Chief Elmer Nibert and members of the Anderson Police Department watched every possible avenue of escape. An all-night vigil was kept at the Smouse home. Officials believed that Smouse could be headed to Chicago to seek refuge among underworld associates of whom he had boasted to friends. There was also a report that he was seen driving to Muncie an hour after the shooting. Muncie police put up a cordon of protection around the home of Philip Underwood on East Jackson Street, where Marie Underwood Smouse was staying. That was her father. Radio broadcasting stations broadcast a description of the fugitive, while police in Indiana cities were alert for his appearance. When last seen by Ed Whipple, Smouse had turned south onto Sheridan from Broadway while searchers were ransacking the building. At some point he circled back and entered the building through a coal chute on the east side, as there was evidence of fresh tracks there that they found the next morning. Beneath the building and grounds were several underground openings, and in these it was believed he took refuge, in other words, the tunnels. Knowing he was armed and very dangerous, it was decided not to enter the underground passages. Tear gas bombs brought in by the Anderson police were dropped into the basement in an effort to force him out of hiding. In a short time, the entire building was so filled with gas that the officers had to take refuge outside. Around 11 o'clock, Mary Smouse arrived home after being summoned from a meeting in Indianapolis. She was taken to the home of a neighbor where she spent the night. Sheriff Daniels returned to Anderson, leaving Deputy William Irvin and several others to guard the premises. Sitting at Witt's Restaurant in Anderson was Anderson Patrolman Walter Happy Heifer. I'll bet he got kidded about that name, don't you? He was taking a break from patrolling his district when in walked Sheriff Daniels. Daniels knew Heifer, and he said he had served as a deputy sheriff in the past. Daniels asked Heifer to return with him to Alexandria. There is a picture of Walter, age 35. Walter Heifer had worked with Opal Hughes when Hughes was an office deputy under Sheriff Arthur Daniels. Walter and his wife, Ina, lived at 712 West 12th Street in Anderson. I went to that address. I doubt that that's the same house that was there in 1927, but that is the address. At 4 a.m., after first stopping at the Alexandria Police Station, Sheriff Daniels, Patrolman Heifer, Rich, and Earl Kaplinger, along with a carload of Alexandria officers, proceeded to the hospital to relieve Chief Nibert and his men. Toward daybreak, a systematic search of the hospital began by 15 armed men. All were warned to take no chances in their efforts to capture Smouse. Among the searchers were Patrolman Heifer and a citizen named Henry Moreland, who was a member of the local American Legion post. Heifer was carrying his revolver while Moreland carried a flashlight. At 6:15 that morning, Heifer and Moreland went upstairs to search the rooms on the second floor, which had been searched previously several times. After searching several rooms, they entered room 5 on the building's west side. He was first attracted to a black bag and the disturbance of a coating of dust at the edge of the bed. Holding his pistol in his right hand and a flashlight in the other, he kneeled down and peered under the bed. Earlier, Deputy Sheriff Arthur Daniels had peered under the bed and no one was there. It was still dark, and the rays of the flashlight spotted Smouse lying on his right side with a white sweater pulled up over his head. Heffer ordered him out, and when Smouse moved his right arm, the officer thought it might be a movement to get a revolver. Heffer fired, but the shot went wild. Now, I don't know how you miss somebody laying under a bed and you're right beside him. Ordered out from under the bed, Smouse rose to a crouching position and said, and here I bleeped out the language he used, "I'm coming out." Smouse raised up, overturning the bed as he was coming up. Heffer shot twice more. One found its mark. Heffer could see blood on the white sweater as Smouse outstretched arms and started towards him. Two more shots and Smouse fell. One wonders if his mother, Mary Smouse, waiting in a neighbor's house, heard the shots and knew what they meant. The postmortem. One bullet penetrated Smouse's right temple. Another went through his left breast, striking the heart. A third hit him in the left chin, and the fourth passed through his right shoulder. Death was instantaneous, according to coroner Sells. His eyes were puffed, showing the effects of the gas, and there were powder burns on his face. Apparently the wound to his neck had bothered him. Remember, he got shot by nicking the Adam's apple, and he had a handkerchief stuffed about it to staunch the flow of blood. Later, a small pool of blood was found under the bed, probably from the same wound. Some odds and ends for you. Hughes's revolver with one bullet was found by officers Barclay, Mercer, and Herman Swift shortly after the shooting of Smouse. It was pointing downward in a water tank located in the main hallway to the right side of the stairway. Just a few feet away was another revolver, allegedly the property of Smouse, was found hidden in a bookshelf to the left of the stairway with 3 bullets. Police learned that George attempted to sell on an automobile tire to a friend the morning of the shooting, explaining he was penniless. Chief Hughes probably came upon Smouse as he was in the act of taking alcohol out, and the discovery, coupled with the warrant caused by the scuffle, which led to the killing. And associates of George's made frequent trips between Alexandria and Chicago. That would be the Bender boy, William Bender. A report circulated the city that Patrolman Heffer had been shot down by Anderson by a Chicago gunman. Coroner Earl Sells exonerated Heffer of any blame in the shooting of Smouse. It was known that Smouse carried a gold watch, that would be his father's, in a small billfold in his pocket. The gold watch came to George upon the death of his father and was highly treasured by the family. Neither was found. He probably had sold it. It was believed that Smouse was in the basement or some of the underground passages when the tear gas bombs were thrown in. The effects of the gas caused him to seek refuge in the upper part of the building. A skylight was found open, indicating he reached it and opened it to gain fresh air. George's overcoat was found drenched with rain, indicating he spent the night on the roof of the building. Remember, they searched the house, but they didn't search the roof. He returned to the interior where he had spent the night walking around attempting to find his way out. He had taken the precaution to remove his shoes so that he could not be heard walking about the house. Opal J. Hughes' funeral. A private funeral service was conducted at his home at 115 South Canal Street at 2 o'clock Sunday afternoon. Public viewing was held Saturday and Sunday. The American Legion Honor Guard kept a vigil at his home. Uniformed police officers from neighboring cities bore the body to a funeral coach and then to the mausoleum at the Oddfellows Cemetery. Hundreds lined the streets. Full military honors were shown when 3 volleys were fired as the casket was placed in its crypt. A young widow, broken-hearted over the tragedy, accompanied her loved one to the final resting place. This is 115 Canal Street, where Opal Hughes lived. No home there today, just a vacant lot. This is the American Legion post in Alexandria, and I call your attention to this is Opal Hughes, and right next to him is his friend Art Daniels. George Smouse funeral. George's body was taken to the Heritage and Son mortuary, where it was prepared for burial following the coroner's inquest. On Saturday the 19th, it was removed to the Smouse home, where it was received by a grief-stricken mother and sisters to await the funeral service. A Requiem High Mass was held Monday morning, February 21st, in St. Mary's Catholic Church. The funeral began at 9 o'clock, but before that hour, the audience of the church was filled, and great numbers stood outside while the Mass was in progress. Burial was in Parkview Cemetery, where he was laid to rest with his father and brother. Mary Smouse rode behind the hearse. This is a funeral card from that funeral. A note that Mary and her daughters put out. This was sincere gratitude and deep appreciation that we acknowledge your kind expression of sympathy shown in our recent bereavement. St. Mary's Church. Epilogue. Marie Underwood Smouse. On January 21st, 1928, Marie married Delaware County Superior Court Judge Robert F. Murray. He was 19 years her senior. They had one son, Robert F. Murray Jr., born January 6, 1929. With her two sisters, Marie operated a music studio in Muncie. She later taught piano in her home at 14 Meadow Lane. Her husband died December the 12th, 1949. Marie died February 13th, 1971, presumably from cancer. The obituary was talked around it, but that's what it sounds like it was. Robert Jr. died May 5th, 1993. They're buried in Beech Grove Cemetery in Muncie, and this is their final resting place. This is Marie's stone at Beech Grove Cemetery. And you see her husband, Robert, and Marie beside him, sir, and then their son in front. Barbara Hughes. This would be the wife of Opal Hughes. The 1930 census lists Barbara and her parents, William and Annie, and younger sister Mildred, living in Phoenix, Arizona. She died there June 19th, 1983, at the Village Green Nursing Home. Her obituary reported that she was an accountant for 40 years at KPNX-TV in Phoenix. It said in her obituary that she'd moved to Arizona 55 years ago. Well, that would be 1928, the year following his murder, from her native Indiana. She's buried at the Green Acres Memorial Park, Scottsdale, Arizona. Marie Smouse. Marie died February 9th, 1994 at the Alexandria Convalescent Center following an extended illness. Her last address was 205 Lincolnwood Drive. She graduated from St. Mary's College in South Bend. She taught high schools in southern Indiana. She worked for the Robertson Lumber Company in Alexandria, which was that lumber company that I told you was along the alley. She managed the Alexandria License Branch for 11 years. Retired in 1969 as the director of the library of the School of Nursing at St. John's Hospital in Anderson. Burial of cremains in the family plot in Parkview Cemetery in Alexandria. Anna Smouse. Born in Alexandria, December 8, 1912, she was valedictorian of her Alexandria High School class of 1930. She married Joseph C. Vigrella in 1936. She had 4 children. She was the only one of the 4 children to marry and have children. She lived in Hobart, Indiana for 70 years. She died September the 9th, 2010 in Littleton, Massachusetts. Burial of her remains are at the Evergreen Memorial Park in Hobart, Indiana. And this is their final resting place in Hobart. You see Annie here and her husband Joseph. Mary Smouse. Mary lived the remainder of her life in Alexandria. She was a registered nurse, He was active in local organizations. He lived in 1938 at 206 East Broadway. 1952, she'd moved to 211 South Canal. She died December the 26th, 1953 in the Bradford Nursing Home in Alexandria. She's buried in the Parkview Cemetery at Alexandria. This is one place she lived at 206 Broadway. She also lived at 212 South Canal and the nursing home, the Bradford Nursing Home, where she passed away. Tombstone of Dr. Smouse, George, John, Marie, and Mary. They're all in the Smouse estate, the cemetery, or Parkview Cemetery, pardon me. In the mausoleum is Opal. End of a dream. The October 7th, 1938 issue of the Daily Times Tribune reported that the old hospital in West Broadway was being dismantled. The property had been sold to Mr. and Mrs. J.J. Smith of 212 West Church Street. Plans for the erection of a home may be made at a later date, according to Mr. Smith in that article. Well, this is the home. Notice the hitch railing for the horse is still in place. Steps are still there, as is a well that's been turned into a little flower garden. And of course the hospital is still there, or the annex is still there. Where did Mary Smouse stay the night of February 17th, 1927? That's one of the questions I had. I asked the dumbest questions, but there's meaning behind it. She stayed here at 701 West Washington Street, the home of a friend. This is the McGee home, this is the Smouse Hospital, and this is St. Mary's Church. George Mailing told me as a young man, as a boy, he could remember seeing the McGee family walk up Sheridan Street, be joined by the Smouse family, walk on up and over to attend church services at St. Mary's Church. He said, I remember that vividly. They were good friends. This is that house. There it is today. This is the view that she would have had. I'm standing in front of the house, and the hospital would have been right up here, only a block away. Postscript number 2. On August the 6th, 2024, just not quite a year ago, Don Almquist, some of you may remember Don Almquist from Remy, he presented the pistol carried by Opal Hughes to me. And I in turn donated it to the Alexandria Monroe Township Historical Museum. He had acquired it from someone who got it shortly after the shooting. Don kept it all those years. He was in Alexandria for a get-together at the bakery on that date, August 6, 2024, and called me up to the front of the building and said, I've got something for you, Steve. And I said, what's that? And he sent his nephew out to the car and brought in that. That's the pistol. He says, I've carried it had it all these years, and I think you should have it because you did the story. I said, it doesn't belong to me, it belongs to Alexandria. And that's where it is today. Number 3, I wanted to know what the family knew of this incident. Well, as I told you, only one daughter, Anna, married and had children. In her obituary listed her children by name, 2 girls and a boy. Well, the boy was Jerry, and I found that he was living in Louisville, Kentucky. So I called him on March 29th, 2012. I introduced myself to him on the phone, and I told him that I was interested in a comment or two from him about what he knew about the shooting that took place. His answer, I don't know anything about it. I said, are you interested in knowing the story? His answer, not really. Okay. I said, I don't know your sisters' names. How can I reach them? Well, he said, I have one sister living in Los Angeles, but she won't know anything. But he says, I have another sister that lives in Massachusetts who was really close to Mom, and she may be of help to you. He gave me her name and her phone number. So that same day, I placed a phone call to her. Her name is Carol Butler. She lived in Middleton, Massachusetts. I had to leave a voicemail. Told her who I was, and I wanted to talk to her about this incident. Didn't hear anything. It wasn't until 1:01 in the afternoon of April 14th that I got a call from her. In the conversation, I had asked her, my purpose was not only to find family information, but I said, I would like to have some pictures of your family if you have them. September 27th, 2018, 6 years later, I get a call from the Alexandria Monroe Township Historical Society. Steve, you got to get up here. You're not going to believe what we just received in the mail. So I drove up there, and this is what they've had for me. Uncommon Dream, Uncommon Tragedy. A special thank you to Mr. Larry Maple, past president of the Alexandria Monroe Township Historical Society, for his valuable assistance in making this presentation possible. He's now gone, but he was an immense help to me in putting this together, and I always want to acknowledge that.